When I walked into the courtroom, my daughter let out a small laugh, and my son-in-law shook his head. The judge went pale, his hand trembling as he whispered, "My God, it really is her?" Every eye in the room turned toward me. No one knew who I truly was until that day. The wooden door was heavier than I expected, or maybe it was because, at 68, I was carrying the weight of a betrayal I never thought I'd have to endure. As I pushed it open, the hinges creaked like a warning, though I wasn't sure to whom. The air inside was thick with tension, the smell of old paper and stale coffee filling the silence. I looked around before taking another step forward. There she was, seated at the table across from me, my daughter, Allison. Beside her sat her husband, Mark, wearing a gray suit he probably thought made him look sharp, though it only highlighted his mediocrity. Allison wore the dark blue dress I had given her last Christmas. The irony of it stung. When they saw me, Allison let out a small laugh. It wasn't loud, but enough to shatter the quiet. Mark shook his head, as though watching a stubborn child misbehave. Their eyes met with a shared look of understanding between co-conspirators. Maybe I was supposed to feel ashamed, that's what they wanted, I suppose, to see me walk in hunched, fragile, and defeated, fitting the image of an old woman no longer capable of caring for herself. But that didn't happen. I took another step. My flat shoes clicked against the cold floor with a surprisingly firm sound. Then, I noticed movement in the corner of the room. The presiding judge, a young woman named Patricia Moore, looked up from her files. But it wasn't her reaction that mattered, it was the man standing next to her. An older gentleman with silver hair, wearing a dark suit, his posture commanding respect. He wasn't supposed to be there. Retired judges don't usually attend small civil hearings, but Richard Coleman was clearly not there, by chance. When our eyes met, I saw the color drain from his face. The pen in his hand trembled. He murmured softly, but the silence made every word clear. "My God, it really is her." Like a row of dominoes, heads turned toward me. Allison and Mark's lawyer, a heavy-set man named Daniel, Mark's cousin, frowned in confusion. The court clerk froze mid-typing. Even the security officer by the door gave me a curious look. I didn't speak. I simply walked to my seat across from my daughter. The weight of every stare pressed down on my shoulders, but beneath it all, I felt something else power, because they had no idea. "Mrs. Kimberly Davis," the clerk announced, my name echoing through the courtroom with the cold weight of legal formality. Richard was still staring at me, disbelief in his eyes. I glanced at Allison. She was biting her nails, a habit she got from me whenever she was nervous. Mark leaned closer, whispering something that was probably meant to calm her. I almost laughed, but couldn't. But to understand, we need to go back to where it began. Everything started 8 months ago, on the morning my husband, Robert, took his last breath, and my daughter revealed who she truly was. Robert died on a cold February morning. He had a heart attack while watering the orchids in our backyard. When I ran outside, the watering can was still in his hand. 43 years of marriage, 43 years of shared breakfasts, late-night arguments over television channels, and quiet evenings side by side. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine. When we buried him, it felt like I buried half of my soul with him. Allison cried at the funeral beautifully, dramatically. Everyone whispered, "Poor thing, she loved her father so much." Mark stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, murmuring words I couldn't hear. They looked like the perfect couple in tragedy. I didn't cry in front of anyone. After nearly 70 years of living, I'd learned that public tears only become weapons for others to use. I saved my grief for the quiet nights, when the house was empty, and it was just me and the silence. 2 months after the funeral, the house felt unfamiliar. No more footsteps, no smell of the morning coffee Robert always brewed, only emptiness. Allison stopped by occasionally, bringing takeout I never asked for, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. She looked at me with pity, and that was harder to bear than loneliness. "Mom, you can't stay here all alone in this big house," she said, sitting on the sofa I'd picked out 15 years ago. "What if something happens?" I answered, "I've lived here 30 years, Allison. I think I'll manage." She sighed. Mark shook his head, his tone patronizing. "Mrs. Davis, we just want what's best for you." The way he said it made me want to throw the crystal ashtray at his face. But I didn't, because they were my daughter and son-in-law, because I still believed family was sacred. Until the matter of inheritance began. Robert had always been careful. He worked as a manager at a food distribution company for 38 years, retired with a stable pension and some savings. When he passed, he left behind our 3-bedroom suburban home, worth about $890,000, and savings of roughly $340,000. I was the sole heir. The law was clear. The wife has rights to the marital estate, and Allison's portion would only come after my passing. But the problem was, I was still alive. Very much alive. And that changed everything. Mark started visiting more often, talking about financial planning, asset transition, and future security. "Have you ever thought about gifting your property before passing, Mrs. Davis?" he asked, scrolling through his phone while Allison pretended to tidy the display cabinet. "Gifting my property?" I repeated. "Yes, it would make things much easier later, fewer legal complications. You'd still live here, of course, but on paper, everything would be simplified." Such a polished word for theft. "I'll think about it," I said, stomach tightening. They exchanged glances. In the following weeks, their visits became more frequent, always with excuses, bringing food, checking the pipes, just seeing how Mom's doing. But I started to notice things. Mark measuring the living room with a tape measure, Allison photographing the paintings my father had left me, whispered conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room. One night after they left, I found a flyer on the chair, a construction company advertisement about home renovation for resale with 60% profit. My blood ran cold. They didn't care about me. They cared about the house, and the only thing standing in their way was me. Then the campaign began, quiet but methodical. Allison called daily, sometimes 3 times a day. "Mom, did you take your medicine?" I only took blood pressure pills, yet she spoke as if I were senile. "Yes, I did." "Are you sure? Yesterday you said that, but when I came over, the pack was still full." Lies, but convincing ones, enough to make me doubt myself for a moment. Mark brought over a little notebook. "You should jot down reminders: Monday, pay the electric bill. Wednesday, property tax." I said. "I've paid my bills for 50 years. He smiled. "Of course, but it's normal to forget things when you're older." "Normal." He planted the seed of doubt. Then came the incidents. One afternoon, Allison stormed in, pale. "Mom," a neighbor called. "They said you left the gas on all night, nearly burned the house down." I frowned. "Which neighbor?" "Mrs. Claudia. She passed away 6 months ago." Allison froze, then stammered. "I mean, her daughter, Megan." Megan lived all the way in Seattle and hadn't visited in years. She must have thought I wouldn't know. "I didn't leave the stove on," I said firmly. "I ate the food you brought." She bit her lip. "Maybe the other night. You've been so forgetful lately." Forgetful, another seed planted. Mark began telling distant relatives they were keeping an eye on Mrs. Davis because she forgets things. Rumors spread quickly. People added their own touches. "She doesn't even remember her grandkids' names." I didn't have grandkids. Allison never wanted children. But somehow, I had become the confused old grandma. The last straw came when Mark brought over a doctor named Dr. Evans, a thin man with wire glasses and a spotless white coat. He said he was a family friend and wanted to check on me. He asked absurd questions. "What day is it today? Who's the president? What's 7 times 8? I answered everyone clearly, looking him straight in the eye. Yet he still shook his head. "Mrs. Davis shows mild cognitive decline. Nothing severe yet, but it should be monitored. I recommend appointing a guardian to protect her." That word again, protect. Allison feigned surprise, but I saw relief flicker in her eyes. "Doctor, what should we do?" "Seek legal counsel. Perhaps request a court order for guardianship to prevent financial mismanagement." And that's how I ended up in court, dragged there by the daughter I raised my entire life. Declaration of incapacity. The word fell into the room like a bomb. When they left, I sat alone in Robert's armchair, the one where he used to watch football and complain about the referees. Betrayal burned inside me, but I didn't cry, because something in me had awakened, something old, sharp, and silent for far too long. I picked up the phone Mark thought I barely knew how to use, opened the voice recorder, and began documenting everything, every lie, every scheme. If they thought I was weak, naive, and easy to fool, they were about to learn the price of underestimating a woman who had survived things they couldn't even imagine. It had all started with an envelope. It arrived on a Thursday morning. Brown paper, court seal, my name printed in cold letters. I recognized it immediately. Anyone who's ever worked in the legal system knows that paper. A summons. My hands trembled as I tore it open, not from fear, but from fury. The complaint read, Plaintiff, Allison Carter. Defendant, Kimberly Davis. Subject, Petition for Declaration of Incapacity and Guardianship. I read every line 3 times. Each word was another blade. Attached was a 17-page petition filled with polished lies written in legal jargon. Their attorney, Daniel Carter, Mark's cousin, had done his job well. He described a woman I didn't recognize. The defendant frequently forgets, shows temporal disorientation, difficulty managing finances, and erratic behavior. Erratic behavior? I woke up at 6 every morning, made coffee, watered my plants, read the newspaper, paid my bills online without anyone's help. They attached 3 medical reports, one signed by Dr. Evans, who had examined me, and 2 others from doctors I'd never met, probably bought signatures. There were also witness statements, neighbors claiming they saw me wandering aimlessly, a pharmacy clerk saying I bought the same medication twice in one day. All fabricated, meticulously planned. At the end of the petition came the demand: removal of my financial authority, appointment of Allison as guardian, transfer of all asset, control the house, savings, everything. I sat on the sofa, clutching the papers. The clock read 3 p.m. The house was silent, but a storm raged inside me. Half an hour later, Allison arrived. She still had a key. I had given it to her years ago, back when I believed she was on my side. She entered with a face full of fake concern. "Mom, I need to talk to you." I looked up, held the envelope. "About this?" She swallowed hard. Mark appeared behind her, as always. "Mom, please, let us explain." "Explain?" I cut her off coldly. Allison sat on the edge of the couch, every movement rehearsed. "We just want to protect you. This house is too big. You're alone, and it's dangerous. As for the money, you could be taken advantage of." I repeated slowly. "Taken advantage of? Like what you're doing to me right now?" Her face hardened. "It's not taking advantage, it's care. Care would be asking me if I needed help, not filing a court petition. You went straight to a judge without even talking to me." Mark stepped in with that falsely calm tone of his. "Mrs. Davis, you're misunderstanding. This is just a legal formality. You'll still live here. We'll simply manage the finances and make sure everything stays in order." "In order for whom? For you two?" I asked. He crossed his arms. "The house is still under your and Robert's names. With guardianship, we can finalize the inheritance faster, sell if necessary, and invest better." "Sell?" I repeated, each word heavy. "You plan to sell my house?" Allison tried to grab my hand, but I pulled it away. "Not now, Mom, but maybe in the future so you can have a smaller, easier place to care for. The rest of the money will keep growing." Growing for them, I thought. Mark sighed, clearly losing patience. "You're overreacting. Either way, everything you have will end up being ours. We're just shortening the process to avoid unnecessary trouble." Family. That word had lost all meaning. I looked at my daughter, searching her eyes for the little girl I once held in my arms, taught to read, and protected from bullies. But there was nothing left. "Just sign it, Mom," Allison said coldly. "It's better for everyone. The lawyer said if you agree, this will all be quick and painless." Painless? As if stripping away my dignity and freedom were a minor procedure. "I'm not signing anything," Mark smirked. "Then we'll do it the hard way. The court will assign an expert evaluation, and the result will be the same. You'll just waste more money on lawyers." They stood up. Allison tried one last time. "Mom, please think of us. Do it for your own good." Then they left. I locked the door, opened the voice recorder app. Everything was there, every word, every unguarded truth. I smiled bitterly. They thought they'd set the perfect trap, but they didn't realize the prey knew how to hunt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the desk in my room, the one Robert had given me for my birthday 20 years ago. The dark wooden surface was speckled with old coffee and ink stains, silent witnesses of countless long nights. I opened the bottom drawer, the one I always kept locked. Inside, among old papers and faded photos, lay my past, wrapped in a brown leather folder. I placed my hand on it, feeling the faint embossed. Letters. Kimberly Davis, State Bar of California, #34719. I hadn't opened it in decades. Inside was my attorney license. The photo showed a young woman with sharp eyes and neatly styled hair. I was 24 when it was taken, freshly licensed and ranked third in my class. Beneath the card were newspaper clippings my mother had carefully saved. Young attorney wins major case against real estate corporation. Kimberly Davis, the new hope of criminal law. Female attorney defies bias and triumphs in packed courtroom. I smiled sadly. That woman seemed gone, but she was still here, buried under wrinkles and silver hair. I had once been very good at what I did. In the 1980s, being a female lawyer was like swimming upstream in a storm. Male colleagues treated me like a secretary. Judges ignored my arguments until I raised my voice. Clients doubted me until I won their first case, and I did win many times. I defended businessmen, housewives wrongly accused, factory workers mistreated by their employers. Each victory led to bigger, tougher cases. It was during one of those cases that I met Richard Coleman. In 1983, I was 26, and he was 29, a young, principled, hard-headed prosecutor. The case involved a business owner charged with tax evasion. The sum back then was a fortune. For 6 months, the courtroom became a battlefield. In the end, I won not because my client was innocent, but because Richard had made a procedural error. I noticed it and used it. After the trial, he came to shake my hand. "Attorney Davis, it's an honor to have faced you, even if I lost." I replied, "The honor is mine, Mr. Coleman." He smiled. "You'll go far. You'll be one of the greats." And for a while I was. I married at 30. Robert was an accountant, calm, steady, the opposite of the chaos of the courtroom. He gave me peace. 3 years later, I became pregnant with Allison. It was a difficult pregnancy, and I had to take a break from work. Robert said, "You don't have to prove anything anymore. Stay home, take care of the baby. We'll figure it out later." I listened. After she was born, motherhood consumed me, sleepless nights, diapers, crying. Time blurred. Maternity leave turned into a permanent pause. 2 years later, when I was ready to return, my career had passed me by. Clients had moved on. Connections faded. Robert always said, "Allison needs you more. We're not hurting for money." And so, 15 years slipped away. By the time Allison became a teenager, I was in my 40s, and my legal career was dead. I still paid my bar dues each year out of habit, maybe guilt, but I never stepped into a courtroom again until now. I closed the folder, picked up my phone, and searched for Walter Drummond, an attorney in Los Angeles. He had been a college friend, one of the few who ever truly respected me. I called. He answered after 3 rings. "Drummond." "Walter, it's Kimberly." Silence, then a disbelieving laugh. "Good Lord, I thought you'd vanished off the face of the earth. How many years has it been?" "Too many." I chuckled softly, the first real laugh in days. "Walter, I need help." "Go on." I told him everything. He listened quietly, occasionally muttering a curse. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "That's vile. You have proof?" "I do. Recordings, documents, everything." "I always knew you were my best student," he said, laughing. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. We're going to make them regret this." I hung up, looking again at my license. The woman in that photo was still alive and hungry for justice. Allison's birthday was coming up, her 38th. She was hosting a party at her new apartment, sleek and modern, all white and cold, the kind of place Mark called sophisticated. I received a message, "Mom, Saturday night, 8 p.m. Hope you can come." It read like a polite order. I considered refusing, but Walter advised, "Go, observe, record. People like them always expose themselves when they think they've won." So, I went. At exactly 8 p.m., I rang the bell. Inside, laughter, soft music, clinking glasses. Allison opened the door, wearing a tight red dress, perfectly made up, her smile artificial. "Mom, I'm so happy you made it." She gave me a brief hug. The expensive perfume that lingered was probably bought with money Mark hadn't earned. The living room was crowded, some distant relatives, their friends, Mark's co-workers. No one truly cared I was there. "Everyone, my mom's here," Allison announced. A few nodded. Most didn't even look. I sat near the window, purse on my lap, the phone inside already recording. Dinner began: expensive food, imported wine, empty chatter about investments, travel, and cars. I barely ate. When dessert came, Mark stood, holding his glass, tapping it gently. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" Glasses lifted. I gripped mine tightly, sensing trouble. "Tonight, we celebrate my wonderful wife's birthday," he said, pulling Allison close. "But I also want to share something important." My heart tightened. Recently, Allison's mother has needed special care. She's been a bit forgetful. He chuckled, but no one joined in. "So we've decided to take over her home, her finances, so she can live comfortably, without worries." All eyes turned to me, some pitying, some curious. Allison added dramatically, "It's hard, you know, to watch your own mother like this, weak and confused. But we must be strong and do what's right." She came closer, placing a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that seemed gentle but reeked of possession. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll take care of everything for you, your house, your money, everything. You don't have to worry about a thing." I could feel her nails pressing into my skin. The air around the table was thick with discomfort. The only relative with a hint of conscience, my cousin Beatrice, turned away. Mark raised his glass, his voice dripping with insincerity. "So, here's to family, health, and new beginnings." "To health," everyone echoed mechanically. I didn't drink. Slowly, I stood and picked up my purse. "Where are you going, Mom?" Allison asked, pretending to be surprised. "Home. But the cake, I'm not hungry." I walked toward the door. No one stopped me. In fact, I saw relief in their eyes, the troublesome old woman finally leaving the table. As my hand touched the doorknob, I heard Mark's voice near the kitchen, just loud enough for me to catch. "In 2 months, that house will be ours, that old witch. But hey, inheritance money doesn't fall from the sky." His laugh echoed, followed by another man's, and then Allison's. "At least she's cooperating," she said. "Otherwise, this would be a nightmare." My hand froze on the knob. "Troublesome." She called me troublesome. I took a deep breath, didn't turn around, didn't speak. I opened the door and walked out. In the elevator, it was just me and the truth. Tears came, not from sadness, but from rage and resolve. Because I had everything, every word, every recording, every piece of proof, and they had no idea what was coming. Monday morning, I sat in Walter Drummond's office on the 12th floor of a tall glass building in downtown Los Angeles. The window overlooked a forest of skyscrapers. Walter was older now, silver-haired, thick glasses, but still carried that sharp grin of a man who lived for legal battles. "Let me hear the recordings," he said, holding out his hand. I handed him my phone. He plugged it in, put on his headphones, and listened for nearly 40 minutes. His expression shifted from shock to anger to delight. When he finally removed the headphones, he smiled dangerously. "Kimberly, this is gold. Pure gold. This will destroy their entire case. We've got multiple charges here: perjury, falsifying documents, attempted financial fraud. I can name at least 5 crimes off the top of my head." I exhaled in relief. So you'll take the case? Walter looked at me as if I'd insulted him. Of course. I'd take it for free, but you'll pay because I know you're too proud not to. For the first time in weeks, I laughed sincerely. How much? $20,000 up front. If we win, and we will, I take 15% of the settlement. Deal. We shook hands. Walter jotted notes quickly. I'll motion to have the recordings entered into evidence, request an independent cognitive evaluation to prove your competence, and I'll expose your daughter's real motive. I hesitated. One more thing. Go on. I want Judge Richard Coleman to know about this case. He raised an eyebrow. Coleman? The legend himself. I know him. We worked together back in the 80s. Kimberly, you never stop surprising me. He respected me once. If he knows I'm the victim of this, he might attend the hearing just to make sure it's done right. Walter thought for a moment, then nodded. Not against the rules. And his presence will make everyone tread carefully. Leave it to me. When I left his office, I carried something I hadn't felt in years, hope, but part of the plan was still incomplete. That afternoon, I took a cab to a quiet suburban neighborhood, following an address scribbled on an old slip of paper. I rang the doorbell. A silver-haired woman opened the door, her face kind and warm. Mrs. Irene? She looked puzzled. I'm Kimberly Davis. Years ago, I was an attorney. I represented your husband in 1987, the workplace injury case. Her eyes widened. My God. Alfred. Yes. He won full compensation and was able to retire peacefully. She placed a hand on her chest, emotional. Oh dear, Attorney Kimberly, please come in. We sat in her small living room. She poured coffee and told me about Alfred, who had passed away 3 years earlier. I told her my story. When I finished, her eyes filled with tears. That's awful. Your own daughter? I nodded. I know this is sudden, but I need witnesses, people who can confirm I'm fully competent. She didn't hesitate. I'll testify. You helped my family. Now it's my turn to help you. Over the week, I met with 3 more former clients, all agreed to stand by me. Walter also arranged a full round of medical tests, neurological, psychiatric, and geriatric. The results were identical, perfectly normal cognitive function, no sign of decline. On Friday, Walter called. It's done. Coleman will attend the hearing as an official observer, but everyone will know who he is. The presiding judge will be nervous, and their lawyer will sweat bullets. Perfect. Kimberly, are you sure you want to go through with this? Your daughter will be exposed publicly. I closed my eyes, remembering Allison's laughter at the party, Mark calling me troublesome, their lies, their schemes. I'm sure. Then be ready. Once you walk into that courtroom, there's no turning back. I hung up and looked at myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back had wrinkles and silver hair, but her eyes still burned with the same fire that once commanded a courtroom. The lawyer in me was back, and she was ready for battle. The morning of the hearing, the sky was gray, as if the heavens knew something important was about to happen. I dressed carefully, black slacks, white blouse, low heels, simple, modest. I wanted them to think I was just a frail old woman. The truth would come later. Walter picked me up at 9 a.m. On the drive, he reviewed the strategy. Let them speak first. The more confident, the better. When it's your turn, stay calm, precise, sharp as a blade. Like the old days. I remember. We arrived at the courthouse just before 10 a.m. The hallway was crowded. The sound of rustling papers and the smell of old coffee brought back memories of another lifetime. Allison and Mark had already arrived. She was wearing the blue dress I once gave her, and he was in his usual gray suit, pretending it was expensive. Their lawyer, Daniel, was laughing into his phone. The moment they saw me walking in with Walter, their smiles vanished. "Mom, who's this?" Allison asked. "My attorney," I said. Mark frowned. "You hired a lawyer? For what?" "This is just a family matter," Walter answered for me, his tone steady and firm. Attorney Walter Drummond, California Bar Association number 18432. And this stopped being a family matter the moment you filed a lawsuit. Daniel walked over, trying to sound casual. Drummond? Downtown Los Angeles office? This kind of small case doesn't need heavy artillery. Walter smiled faintly. I think it does. We entered the courtroom when our names were called. The room was small, just a long table, a few chairs, and a noisy air conditioner. But next to the judge's bench sat an extra chair, and in it, Richard Coleman. His hair was white now, his suit dark, his posture still as straight as ever. When I walked in, our eyes met. He recognized me instantly, his expression changing. His hand trembled slightly as he murmured, his voice hoarse but clear, "My God, it really is her." Every head turned toward me. Allison looked confused. Mark whispered something under his breath, and Daniel flipped through his file in panic. Judge Patricia Moore, a woman in her 30s, entered. Case number 41728, petition for declaration of incapacity. Please be seated. We sat, Walter and I on one side, Allison, Mark, and Daniel on the other. Judge Moore noticed Richard and hesitated slightly. Judge Coleman, it's an honor to have you here. He nodded, but his gaze stayed on me. Let's begin. Attorney Daniel, you may proceed. He stood confidently, too confidently. Your Honor, this case is simple. The respondent, Kimberly Davis, age 68, a widow, is showing cognitive decline, forgetfulness, disorientation, and difficulty managing her assets. The family merely wishes to protect her and ensure her affairs are handled responsibly until she passes. Walter interrupted immediately. That's a generous way of describing it, Daniel flushed. You're twisting my words. No, Walter said calmly. I'm stating them plainly. The judge banged her gavel. Order. Continue. Daniel went on for 10 minutes, presenting falsified reports, coached witnesses, and a carefully staged narrative. Allison shed tears at just the right moments, and Mark held her hand, pretending to comfort her. When Daniel finally sat down, self-satisfaction spread across his face. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Davis, would you like to speak? I stood up. Walter placed a reassuring hand on my arm. I took a deep breath. When I spoke, my voice wasn't the tremor of a frightened old woman. It was steady, the voice of an attorney who had never lost her composure. Your Honor, my full name is Kimberly Davis. I am a licensed attorney, California State Bar number 34,719, admitted since 1979. I practiced law for 15 years in both civil and criminal litigation. I have won cases against major corporations and defended hundreds of clients. I only stepped away to care for my family, but I have never lost my capacity to think, reason, or act. The room went silent. Allison's face turned pale, Mark's jaw dropped, and Daniel froze. Richard Coleman smiled, slightly genuine, proud. I moved my chair closer to the table, just like I used to when cross-examining witnesses 40 years ago. My voice was clear, sharp. Your Honor, I would like to present evidence not included in the plaintiff's filings proof of the true motive behind this case. Judge Moore leaned forward. Proceed. Walter opened his briefcase, handing over copies of recordings, verified medical reports, and independent witness statements. First, I said, the medical reports submitted by the plaintiff are falsified. Dr. Evans, who allegedly evaluated me, works at a clinic owned by Mark Carter, the plaintiff's husband. That is a blatant conflict of interest, Daniel shot up. That's a baseless accusation. Richard's voice broke through, deep and commanding. Let her finish, counselor. He called me counselor. Daniel sat back down, defeated. I underwent independent evaluations by 3 separate specialists, a neurologist, a psychiatrist, and a geriatrician. All 3 confirmed I am fully competent. I handed the documents to the judge. She flipped through them quickly, her expression clearly impressed. Next, I continued, the so-called pharmacy employee who claimed I purchased medication twice in one day does not exist. And the neighbor who allegedly said I left the gas stove on all night passed away 6 months ago. Another neighbor they cited moved out of the neighborhood 3 years ago. Allison began trembling. Mark loosened his tie, sweat gathering on his forehead. Every statement they had made was a lie, every witness fabricated. Judge Moore glared at Daniel. This is extremely serious, counselor. He opened his mouth but couldn't speak. "And now," I said, feeling a bitter satisfaction, "the final piece of evidence, the recordings." Walter connected his laptop to the speakers. The sound filled the room. The first recording played, taken in my own home, when Allison and Mark tried to pressure me into signing away my rights. Mark's voice echoed clearly. "You're overreacting. We're family. Everything you own will be ours eventually. We're just trying to make things easier." Allison shut her eyes, her face burning red. But I wasn't done. The second recording began, the one from the birthday dinner. Mark's voice again, dripping with disdain. "In 2 months, that house will be ours, that old woman. But hey, inheritance money doesn't fall from the sky." Then came Allison's laugh. "At least she's cooperating. Otherwise, it'd be hell." The silence that followed froze the room. Judge Moore's face went pale. Richard Coleman shook his head, disgusted. Even the court clerk had stopped typing, staring in disbelief. Allison sobbed, and Mark's face turned scarlet as he stared at the floor. "That old woman," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "That's what my son-in-law called me, and my daughter laughed along. She agreed." I turned to Allison. Our eyes met. "I gave birth to you. I gave up my career to raise you. I stayed up all night when you were sick. I sold my mother's jewelry to pay your tuition. And now, you call me a burden?" Allison tried to speak but broke down in tears. I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, this case is not about my mental capacity. It's about greed, 2 people too impatient to wait for their inheritance, so they fabricated a lawsuit to steal from me while I'm still alive." Judge Moore flipped through the files, her expression growing increasingly stern. "Do you have any further evidence?" "Yes. I have 4 sworn statements from former clients, people I represented decades ago, attesting to my full competence. I also have bank statements proving I manage my finances responsibly." I placed my attorney ID card on the table. "This license has existed for 46 years and is still active. I've paid my bar dues every single year. I never stopped being a lawyer, I only paused my career." I looked toward Richard, the woman who once stood against powerful corporations, who faced down prejudice in a courtroom full of men, who battled brilliant prosecutors like Mr. Coleman here. That woman never disappeared. Richard smiled genuinely. "She was just asleep," I said softly. "And now she's awake." Judge Moore set the file down and banged her gavel. "We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I expect an explanation from the plaintiff. And, Counselor Daniel, I suggest you review your ethical guidelines. You're in serious trouble." She left the bench, with Richard following behind. Before he stepped out, he gave me a small, respectful nod. Only we remained in the room. Allison stumbled forward, tears in her eyes. "Mom," I raised a hand. "Not now." Mark tried to keep his composure. "You'll regret this. We're family." I looked straight at him, my tone like ice. Family doesn't scheme. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't call their mother-in-law a burden. His face went pale. Walter and I left the room. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, my heart racing not from fear, but from adrenaline. "You were brilliant," Walter said proudly. "It's not over yet," I replied. "Oh, it's over for them," he said. I smiled, exhausted. "Now comes the part they'll hate most." "What part?" "Justice." When we returned to the courtroom, everything had changed. Allison's eyes were swollen, Mark was biting his nails, Daniel was frantically flipping through papers. Judge Moore entered, her face expressionless, the look of someone who had already decided. Richard resumed his seat, posture as dignified as ever. "Resuming the hearing," the judge said firmly. "Counselor Daniel, does the plaintiff wish to make a statement?" He stood, clearly panicked. "Your Honor, there's been some misunderstanding. My clients acted only out of genuine concern for Mrs. Davis's well-being." "A misunderstanding," Richard cut in sharply. "I've heard the recordings. I've seen the falsified reports. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's a crime." Daniel swallowed hard. Judge Moore struck her gavel. "Let me be clear. Based on the evidence provided by the defense, this court finds the petition was filed with malicious intent, relying on false testimony to seize property. Therefore, I dismiss the petition for incapacity and guardianship in its entirety," Allison gasped. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I am referring this case for criminal investigation on charges of perjury, document falsification, and attempted fraud. The file will be sent to the district attorney." Mark leapt up, panicked. "Your Honor, please, this will ruin us. Sit down." Her voice was cold steel. He obeyed instantly. "As for Counselor Daniel Carter," she said, "the court requests the State Bar conduct a full review of his ethics violations. Building a case on falsified medical evidence is a grave offense." Daniel's face turned ashen. Court adjourned. The final bang of the gavel echoed like a gunshot. Walter gripped my hand, eyes shining. Richard approached and extended his hand. "Attorney Davis, it's an honor to witness this. You haven't lost your light." I took his hand, my throat tight. "Thank you, Richard, for everything." He smiled and left, leaving behind an air of deep respect. Allison started to approach, but Walter blocked her. "If you have anything to say it to your lawyer." We left the courthouse that afternoon under a gentle sun. The sky was clear, as if even nature acknowledged the victory. But I knew this wasn't the end. In the weeks that followed, justice took its course. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation. Dr. Evans confessed he had signed the report without ever examining me. Mark had paid him $5,000. The clinic fired him immediately. The fake witnesses were traced. One woman admitted Mark had promised her $3,000 to lie, and because she was unemployed and desperate, she agreed. Now she faced perjury charges. Attorney Daniel's license was temporarily suspended. His firm terminated him to save its reputation. Mark lost his job. The story spread online. Son-in-law tries to declare mother-in-law incompetent to steal her estate. The advertising agency where he worked fired him within 2 days to avoid scandal. Allison, who only did part-time fashion consulting, lost all her clients. Who would hire a woman who tried to steal from her own mother? But I wasn't done. I filed a civil suit for emotional damages, requesting $150,000. Walter thought the number was steep, but I said, "It's not about the money, it's about the lesson." The court agreed, ordering Allison and Mark to pay the full amount in installments over the next few years. 3 months later, when I received the first payment, I withdrew the funds and drove to a nursing center in the mining suburbs, a home for elderly people who had been neglected or abused by their families. The director, Mrs. Lucy, greeted me with a kind smile. "Are you here to visit someone?" "No," I said. "I'm here to donate." I handed her the check, $150,000. Her eyes widened. "I received this money from my daughter as compensation for trying to steal from me. I don't want to keep it. I want it to help those who truly need it. Mrs. Lucy took my hand, tears streaming down her face. "You have no idea what this means. We can fix the roof, buy medicine, improve the meals." I smiled. "Oh, I know. It means that something good can still grow from something cruel." I stepped outside, feeling lighter than I had in years. I had proven what truly mattered. I didn't need money. I needed justice, dignity, and the truth that every action has consequences. Allison and Mark were learning that lesson the hard way. But my story wasn't over yet. The most painful part remained the part where I had to face the question of whether forgiveness had a place or if some wounds simply cut too deep to ever heal. 3 months after the trial, Allison called. I looked at her name flashing on the screen and hesitated. The phone rang 8, 10, 12 times. On the 15th, I finally answered. "Hello." Silence. Then her trembling voice, "Mom, can I see you? You're talking to me now. Please." I almost said no. It would have been easy to hang up, block her number, and go on living as if she never existed. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe the faint trace of a mother's love made me agree. Saturday, 3 p.m., at my house. "Thank you, Mom." I hung up before she could say anything else. Saturday came. She arrived right on time, alone, without Mark. She barely looked like herself anymore. Her hair was tied up hastily, no makeup, a plain white t-shirt, worn-out jeans, a tired face. I didn't hug her. I just opened the door and pointed to the chair. Sit. She sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly, eyes down. I made coffee not out of hospitality, but to keep my hands busy. Setting the cup down on the table, I said coldly, "Speak." Allison took a deep breath. "Mom, I came to apologize." "Apologize?" "I know it's not enough. It'll never be enough. But I truly regret everything." "Regret what exactly?" I leaned forward. "For trying to have you declared incompetent, for calling you a burden, for lying, for destroying your reputation. I regret all of it." She started crying. "Crying is easy," I said flatly. "Tears are cheap." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I know I was awful. Mark, he convinced me it was the right thing, that sooner or later you'd need care, that we were just being responsible." "And you believed him?" "I wanted to," she said through sobs, "because it was easier. We were drowning in debt, mortgage overdue, credit cards maxed out. When Dad died, I looked at your house, your money, and thought it was a way out. A way out by stealing from me." She nodded, crying harder. At least this time, she wasn't lying. "Where's Mark now?" I asked. She hesitated. "We're divorced. Last month he filed, said I ruined his life, that because of me he lost his job, his reputation, everything. As if I did it all alone." I looked straight at her. "But you did, and you know it. You both did it together. I know that. And now that he's gone, you come back here. What do you want, Allison? Money? Shelter? Easy forgiveness?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, Mom, I don't want anything. I just wanted to tell you that you were right. About him, about me. About what we were users, selfish, awful people." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Robert once tended his orchids. "Do you know what hurt me most, Allison?" I asked without turning around. "It wasn't the money, or even the house. It was the lack of respect. It was when you looked at me as an obstacle. When you laughed as Mark called me a burden. That's when I realized you never really saw me as your mother." I turned, my voice steady. "I was just the woman who raised you until you no longer needed me. Wasn't I?" She lowered her head and broke down, her whole body shaking. A part of me wanted to hold her, that old motherly instinct still flickering somewhere deep inside. But reason, the part of me that survived the betrayal, kept me standing firm. "Get up," I said. She obeyed, wiping her tears. "You want forgiveness?" She whispered. "I don't deserve it." "No, you don't," I replied. "But I'll give you something worth more than easy forgiveness." She looked up, confused. "I'll give you a chance, just one, to prove you're no longer the woman who sold her. Self-respect for money. Find a job, any job. Support yourself. Learn the value of what you have. When you've paid the first part of the compensation with your own hands, without anyone's help, come back. Then we'll talk." Allison whispered. "I already found a job as a receptionist at a dental clinic. The pay's barely enough to cover my bills." "Good," I said. "That means you've started. But it'll take years to pay it all." "Exactly," I said, "because forgiveness doesn't happen overnight. Trust can't be rebuilt with a single conversation. You broke everything we had. If you want it back, rebuild it one piece at a time." She nodded, swallowing her tears. "And one more thing," I added. "Don't come every week. Don't call crying. Live your life. Stand on your own. When you truly understand the consequences of what you did, then come find me." "So, you'll never forgive me?" she asked softly. I looked at her for a long line. "Time. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, Allison, and I will never forget. But maybe, someday, I'll look at you, and it won't hurt anymore. Maybe." She nodded and walked slowly to the door. Before leaving, she turned back. "Mom, I really am sorry," I whispered. "So am I." The door closed. I leaned against it and cried. For the first time in months, I truly cried, not from weakness, but from acceptance. Acceptance that some things, once broken, can never be fixed. 2 years have passed since that day in court. 2 years that completely changed my life. Now I'm sitting in a small cafe in Boston, watching people stroll down Newbury Street. The afternoon sunlight spills across the patio table, mixing with the scent of fresh pastries and rich coffee. I've traveled to New York, Seattle, San Francisco, Miami, the places Robert once promised to take me but never did. Not because he didn't want to, but because life swept us along and I let it. But now, things are different. I sold half my house, split it into 2 units. I live in one and rent the other to a young family. The rent gives me the freedom to travel and afford the trips I'd always dreamed of. Part goes toward fixing the house. The rest I donate to places that need it. One day, Mrs. Lucy from the nursing center called and invited me to speak to a group of elderly residents who'd been mistreated by their families. I refused at first. "I'm not a speaker," I said. She only smiled. "You're a survivor, and that's worth more than any degree," I agreed, heart pounding. When I faced those lined faces, those eyes carrying the same pain as mine, the words came easily. I told my story, honestly and completely. When I finished, one elderly woman asked, "Where did you find the courage to fight back?" I thought for a moment, then said, "It wasn't courage, it was anger. The anger of realizing that my worth didn't depend on the people who betrayed me." The room erupted in applause. Some hugged me, some cried. After that day, more invitations followed from senior advocacy groups, human rights organizations, even a university wanting me to speak about the legal rights of the elderly. I realized my story wasn't just mine. It was the story of thousands who'd been made invisible, dismissed as useless simply because they'd grown old. I became a voice for those who'd lost their own. Allison kept her word. She worked, struggled, and paid every cent of her debt. It took almost 2 years, but she finished. 6 months ago, she called me. "Mom, I just made the final payment," I said. "Congratulations. Can I visit?" I paused for a few seconds. Yes. When she arrived, I saw that she wasn't the same woman anymore. Thinner, her hands rough from work, but her eyes steadier. She'd been promoted to administrative assistant at the clinic. We sat over coffee, talking not about the past but the present. She said she was in therapy, learning to take responsibility and to forgive herself. I haven't fully forgiven her. I don't know if I ever will. But I've left the door slightly open because forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, painful journey. I stood, paid for my coffee, and stepped onto the street. Tomorrow I'll fly to Chicago, maybe then to Portland or Denver, wherever I feel like going. My phone buzzed. A text from Walter. "Kimberly, a TV network wants to interview you about financial abuse of the elderly. Are you interested?" I smiled. Yes. After my trip. I slipped the phone into my pocket and kept walking. At 70 years old, I finally understood what I should have known long ago. Kindness doesn't mean foolishness. Gentleness isn't weakness. Love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. And growing older doesn't make you worthless, it makes you wiser. Allison and Mark once thought I was weak because I chose compassion. They thought they could trample me, because I chose to be a mother instead of a lawyer. But they never understood one thing. I never stopped being a lawyer. I only put away my robe, and when the time came, I put it back on. I proved that respect can't be begged, for it must be claimed, that dignity can't be bought or stolen, and that underestimating a woman who has spent a lifetime surviving under the weight of others' scorn is the most expensive mistake anyone can make. They paid the price, and I'm finally living. I stopped in front of a small bookstore. In the window was a sign, "It's never too late to start again." I walked in and bought 3 books, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to, because I could. Because I was free, and because I'd learned that the most beautiful revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you, it's living happily despite them. Family isn't always where you're born, it's where people truly wish you peace. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means refusing to let pain define your life. And sometimes, love needs boundaries, so others learn that kindness isn't something to be exploited. I believe everyone has an Allison in their life, a relationship that teaches us how to trust again, how to let go, and how to rise. What about you? Have you ever had to learn a lesson like mine? Share your thoughts in the comments because maybe your story will reach someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to keep walking with me through stories of family, love, and resilience, stay with this channel. Together, we'll listen, understand, and grow from stories that may seem to belong to others, but in truth, are much closer to our own.